The massive starship Concordia drifted through the void, its sleek hull reflecting the light of distant stars. Admiral stood on the bridge, his four arms crossed behind his back as he stared at the tactical display. The Galactic Council's most advanced vessel had been patrolling this sector for 3 cycles, maintaining the quarantine that had lasted for over 2 centuries. "Sir, we're approaching the restricted zone," reported Lieutenant, her tentacles dancing across the control panel with practiced precision. The young Aquarian had never seen the quarantine world with her own eyes, only heard the stories passed down through generations of spacers. His mandibles clicked together, a sign of deep thought among his species. "Maintain minimum safe distance. I want a full sensor sweep of Prime." The planet below them looked deceptively peaceful from orbit. Vast forests covered most of the landmasses, broken by mountain ranges and crystal-clear lakes. No cities, no technology signatures, no signs of the advanced civilization that had once thrived there. To most observers, it appeared to be a pristine wilderness world, perfect for colonization. But knew better. Somewhere in those forests lived the creatures that had terrified the galaxy's greatest minds. Or as they were more commonly known throughout the galaxy, the Howling Ones. "Admiral," called out Commander from his station near the rear of the bridge. The officer's compound eyes glittered as they processed the incoming data. "Sensors are detecting the same energy patterns as before. No technological signatures, but there's definitely something down there." The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. Every crew member present had heard the stories. 250 years ago, they had been one of the galaxy's most promising young civilizations. Their world was rich in rare minerals, and their people showed remarkable aptitude for both science and warfare. The Galactic Council had welcomed them with open arms, eager to add their strength to the growing alliance of peaceful worlds. Then came the first reports of the change. "Pull up the historical records," commanded. "I want to review the initial contact reports again." The main flickered, replacing the image of Prime with archived footage from over 2 centuries past. A much younger galaxy looked back at them, full of hope and possibility. The early videos showed the as they had once been, tall, graceful humanoids with pale skin and striking silver hair. Their cities had been marvels of organic architecture, grown rather than built, with spiraling towers that seemed to reach toward the stars themselves. Ambassador Ha had been their first representative to the Galactic Council. The archived footage showed him speaking passionately about his people's desire for peace and cooperation. His voice carried a musical quality that had charmed diplomats from dozens of species. His eyes held intelligence and warmth that spoke of a bright future for galactic relations. "Fast forward to the incident reports," ordered, though he knew the contents by heart. The footage changed, showing grainy security camera feeds from various space stations and diplomatic facilities. What they revealed had shocked the galaxy to its core. Ha and his delegation had some kind of horrific transformation during what should have been a routine trade negotiation. Their graceful forms had twisted and elongated, their faces stretching into lupin muzzles filled with razor-sharp teeth. Thick fur had erupted from their skin, and their peaceful demeanor had been replaced by an animalistic rage that all explanation. "Computer, play audio log 447 Alpha," said quietly. The bridge filled with the sound of terrified screaming, punctuated by inhuman howls that seemed to chill the very air. Ambassador Ha's voice, now distorted beyond recognition, could be heard roaring something in an ancient dialect that the galaxy's best linguists had never been able to translate. The security forces had been helpless against creatures that possessed not only enhanced physical abilities, but also seemed to retain their advanced knowledge of technology and tactics. 17 casualties in the first incident, Commander reported unnecessarily. 43 in the second. By the time the emergency protocols were implemented, over 300 beings had been killed or injured. Nodded grimly. The Galactic Council had faced an impossible choice. They were clearly dangerous in their transformed state, but they were also a sapient species with rights under galactic law. Extermination was unthinkable, but allowing them to remain free posed an unacceptable risk to billions of innocent lives. The solution had been quarantine. Every, whether they had the change or not, had been relocated to there. A massive energy barrier had been constructed around the entire system, powered by 3 orbital platforms that maintained constant vigilance. No ship could enter or leave without authorization from the highest levels of galactic government. "Sir, incoming transmission from Council Central," Lieutenant announced. "Put it through." The shimmered, revealing the image of Counselor, an elderly whose scales had faded to a distinguished silver. Behind him, could see the impressive chambers of the Galactic Council, where representatives from 47 different species gathered to guide the destiny of known space. Admiral's voice carried across the void with the weight of authority. "I trust your patrol has been uneventful." "Yes, Counselor. No attempts to breach the quarantine. The energy barrier remains at full strength." "Excellent," paused, his large eyes reflecting something that might have been regret. "I sometimes wonder if we made the right choice, Admiral. There were a remarkable people before whatever happened to them." Had wondered the same thing countless times during his patrols. "With respect, Counselor, we had no choice. The risk to galactic security was too great." "Perhaps, but intelligence reports suggest their transformation may not have been entirely natural." "This was news too. What do you mean, sir?" "There are theories that they may have encountered something during their deep space explorations. Something that changed them at a fundamental level. Some of our believe it might have been a form of ancient biotechnology, possibly even predating our current galactic civilization." The implications sent a chill through exoskeleton. If they had been infected or altered by some unknown force, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? More importantly, what if that same force was still out there? "Are you suggesting we should reconsider the quarantine?" he asked carefully. His expression grew troubled. "I'm not suggesting anything yet, Admiral, but I want you to know that there may be developments in the near future. Developments that could change everything we think we know about thee and their transformation." Before could ask for clarification, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Lieutenant's voice cut through the noise with barely controlled panic. "Admiral, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the outer rim. Something's coming through hyperspace, and it's big." He automatically shifted to show the sensor readings. What saw there made his blood run cold. A fleet of ships unlike anything in the galactic database was dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Their design was organic and twisted, as if someone had taken living tissue and shaped it into instruments of war. "Counselor," said urgently, "you need to see this." His eyes widened as he processed the sensor data. "By the ancient stars," he whispered, "they're real, the Devourers are real." "The what?" "Admiral, you need to get your ship away from Prime immediately. Those creatures down there may be the only ones who can save us all." The transmission cut out, leaving staring at a tactical display that showed the approaching fleet. Each ship was massive, easily dwarfing even the largest galactic dreadnoughts. As he watched, smaller craft began detaching from the main vessels, spreading out in a search pattern that suggested they were looking for something specific. "Lieutenant, get me a direct channel to Galactic Command," he ordered. "Priority Alpha." "Sir, I'm trying, but there's massive interference. These ships are jamming all communications." Commander looked up from his station, his compound eyes reflecting the red warning lights that now bathed the bridge. "Admiral, I'm reading energy signatures from the planet's surface. They are responding to the newcomers." For the first time in over 2 centuries, something was stirring in the forests of Prime. Deep in the wilderness, creatures that had been dismissed as monsters were emerging from their hiding places. Their howls echoed across the continents, carrying a message that no galactic citizen could understand, but that filled them with an inexplicable sense of dread. As the alien fleet drew closer, realized that everything the galaxy thought it knew about them was about to change. The question was whether that change would come too late to save them all from whatever horrors were now descending from the void. The Concordia shuddered as an unknown force swept over it, and in the distance, the quarantine barriers that had held for over 2 centuries began to flicker and fail. The forest floor trembled beneath massive paws as Ha raced through the ancient woods of his. His transformation was complete now. The elegant diplomat he had once been replaced by something far more primal and powerful. Silver fur rippled across muscles that had been enhanced beyond normal biological limits, and his senses were sharp enough to detect the approach of the alien fleet from orbit. Behind him, dozens of his pack followed, their movements fluid and coordinated despite their seemingly bestial appearance. They communicated through a complex series of howls, growls, and subtle body language that would have seemed like mere animal behavior to outside observers. But Ha knew better. The change had not made them less intelligent. It had made them something else entirely. He skidded to a halt at the edge of a vast clearing where the Heartwood stood. The massive tree was older than written history, its trunk easily wide enough to house an entire city. Carved into its bark were symbols that predated galactic civilization, spiraling patterns that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. The other called this place the Memory Grove, though none of the galactic species had ever understood its true significance. As Ha approached the tree, its surface began to glow with a soft blue light. The symbols pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, responding to his presence. He placed one clawed hand against the bark, and immediately his mind was flooded with images and knowledge that had been preserved herefore. He saw the true history of his people, hidden from the galaxy's historians, and they had not been simple explorers who stumbled upon some unknown biotechnology. They had been guardians, inheritors of an ancient responsibility that stretched back to the dawn of galactic civilization. Long before the current alliance of species had formed, another civilization had ruled the stars. The predecessors had been masters of biological engineering, creating wonders that made current galactic technology look primitive by comparison. But their greatest achievement had also been their downfall, the creation of the Devourers. The images in Ha's mind showed him creatures of living shadow and twisted flesh, beings that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very essence of life itself. The predecessors had created them as the ultimate weapon, but the Devourers had quickly evolved beyond their creator's control. They had swept across the galaxy like a plague, consuming entire worlds and leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. In desperation, the dying predecessors had seeded certain species with the ability to undergo the change when the Devourers returned. The transformation was painful and irreversible, but it was also the only way to survive contact with the ancient enemy. The changed ones possessed enhanced physical abilities, but more importantly, they carried within their altered genetics the knowledge and instincts needed to fight back. They had been one of those chosen species. A deep howl echoed across the forest, snapping Ha back to the present. His approach through the undergrowth, her own transformation having turned her from a brilliant scientist into something that looked like a cross between a wolf and a hunting cat. But her eyes still held the keen intelligence that had made her one of the galaxy's foremost experts in xenobiology. "The barriers are failing," she communicated through their complex body language. "The orbital platforms are losing power." Ha nodded grimly. The quarantine systems had been designed to keep his people imprisoned, but they had also served as an early warning system. If the Devourers could drain energy from galactic technology that easily, the galaxy's defenses would be useless. "How long do we have?" he asked. His ears flattened against her skull. "Hours, perhaps less. Their scout ships are already entering the atmosphere." Through the canopy above, Ha could see dark shapes descending from the sky. The Devourer vessels looked like massive insects crossed with deep-sea creatures, all writhing tentacles and glistening organic armor. They moved with an alien grace that spoke of intelligence, but it was a cold, predatory intelligence that saw all other life as food. "Then we need to move quickly," Ha decided. "Signal the other packs. It's time to reveal ourselves to the galaxy." Hesitated. "Are you certain, after what they did to us?" It was a fair question. The galactic species had imprisoned the base on fear and misunderstanding, condemning an entire civilization to exile without bothering to learn the truth. They had branded the changed ones as monsters and hidden them away like a shameful secret. The temptation to let the galaxy face the Devourers alone was strong. But Ha remembered what he had once been, before the ancient instincts had awakened within him. He had believed in the ideals of galactic cooperation and peaceful coexistence. Those beliefs had not died with his transformation. They had simply been buried beneath layers of primal knowledge and enhanced survival instincts. "The galaxy made a mistake," he said finally. "But condemning billions of innocent beings to death would make us the monsters they believe us to be." Nodded, accepting his decision. She raised her muzzle to the sky and released a howl that carried for kilometers in every direction. Within moments, answering calls echoed from across the planet as dozens of packs received her signal. The sound was beautiful and terrible at the same time, a symphony of voices that spoke of unity and determination in the face of impossible odds. Meanwhile, in orbit above Prime, Admiral was struggling to maintain control of his ship as the alien vessels drew closer. The Concordia's advanced systems were failing one by one, drained by some unknown force that seemed to emanate from the approaching fleet. "Sir, we're losing life support on decks 7 through 12, Commander reported, his usual calm demeanor cracking under the strain. "The power drain is accelerating." Gritted his teeth. His ship was one of the most advanced in the Galactic fleet, equipped with weapons and defenses that had been refined over centuries of space warfare. But none of it seemed to have any effect on these creatures. Energy weapons simply dissipated against their organic hulls, and kinetic projectiles were absorbed and converted into more biomass for their ships. "Lieutenant, any luck re-establishing communications?" "Negative, sir. The jamming effect is too strong, but I am picking up something else, energy signatures from the planet's surface. They're unlike anything in our database." Before could respond, the main flickered and cleared, revealing an impossible sight. A figure was standing in the ship's primary communications array, somehow having appeared there despite the fact that the room was sealed and guarded. It took a moment to recognize the creature, as though it was unlike any he had seen in the historical records. This one stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body covered in thick silver fur that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Its face was definitely lupin, but the intelligence in its eyes was unmistakably sapient. When it spoke, its voice carried clearly despite the distance and the lack of any visible communication equipment. "Admiral," the creature said, its words carefully pronounced despite the obvious changes to its vocal structure. "My name is Ha. I believe we need to talk." The bridge fell silent as every crew member stared at the Howling Ones had been silent for over 2 centuries, communicating with no one from the outside galaxy. Now one of them was not only speaking, but somehow broadcasting directly to their ship. "How are you doing this?" asked. "The same way my people have survived for the past 250 years, Ha replied. "Through abilities that your science does not yet understand. But that is not important right now. What matters is that your fleet, your worlds, your entire civilization is about to face an enemy that conventional weapons cannot defeat." As if to emphasize his point, one of the alien vessels fired a beam of dark energy at the Concordia. The ship's shields absorbed the first impact, but could see the power readings dropping rapidly. A second shot would likely overwhelm their defenses entirely. "What do you want?" asked. Ha's expression grew grim. "I want to save the galaxy from making the same mistake that destroyed our predecessors. But first, you need to understand what you're truly facing. Those ships carry the Devourers, ancient creatures that your ancestors helped to create. They consume life itself, and they will not stop until every world in known space has been stripped bare." The ship shuddered as another energy beam struck home. This time, the shields flickered and failed, leaving the Concordia defenseless against the next attack. "However," Ha continued, "there is hope. My people carry within their blood the knowledge of how to fight back, but we cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it from quarantine. The barriers that keep us imprisoned also prevent us from reaching the tools we need to defend the galaxy." "Understood immediately. You want me to lower the quarantine fields?" "I want you to trust that the monsters you fear are not the real enemy here," Ha corrected. "My people may look frightening to you, but we are still the same beings who once stood beside you as allies. We have simply become what we needed to become in order to survive." Around the ship, more Devourer vessels were materializing out of hyperspace. The enemy fleet now numbered in the hundreds, each ship larger and more threatening than anything the galaxy had ever faced. In the distance, could see that similar fleets were appearing near other inhabited systems. The invasion had begun, and the galaxy's guardians were trapped on a quarantined world, imprisoned by the very people they were trying to save. The decision that would determine the fate of the galaxy came down to a single moment of choice. Admiral stared at Ha's image on his while his ship's systems failed around him. Every instinct trained into him over decades of military service screamed that trusting them was madness. They were dangerous, unpredictable, and had already proven capable of extreme violence. But as another Devourer ship materialized directly ahead of the Concordia, its writhing tentacles already reaching out to drain the last of his vessel's power, realized he was out of options. "Computer," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Authorization code Alpha 77. Initiate emergency shutdown of quarantine barriers around Prime." Commander's compound eyes went wide. Sir, that requires council approval, the protocols. The protocols don't account for galactic extinction, snapped. Execute the order. The ship's computer processed his authorization for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the familiar voice announced, "Quarantine barriers disengaging. Warning, this action violates multiple galactic treaties and regulations." They watched as the massive energy fields that had contained the for over 2 centuries flickered and died. The 3 orbital platforms that had maintained the prison began to power down, their energy redirected to the planet's surface through conduits that had been hidden for. Han nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Admiral. You have just taken the first step towards saving your civilization." "I hope I haven't doomed it instead," muttered. What happened next everything the galactic species thought they knew about physics and biology. Across Prime, the Changed Ones began to move with purpose and coordination that spoke of a plan centuries in the making. They streamed from hidden settlements deep in the forests, their numbers far greater than anyone had imagined. But they were not fleeing the planet. Instead, they were converging on ancient sites that predated even the civilization. Stone circles, crystal formations, and organic structures that seemed to grow from the very bedrock itself began to glow with the same blue light that emanated from the heartwood. Led her pack to one such site, a ring of standing stones that hummed with barely contained energy. The symbols carved into each monolith were identical to those found on ruins throughout the galaxy, though most archaeologists had dismissed them as coincidental similarities between primitive cultures. Now those symbols blazed to life as the Changed Ones took their positions around the circle. Could feel the ancient technology responding to her presence, systems that had slumbered for awakening at the touch of genetically coded key holders. The stones began to rotate, aligning themselves with stellar coordinates that pointed toward the heart of the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out at hundreds of sites across the planet. They had not been randomly scattered during their exile. They had been carefully positioned to activate a network that their predecessor ancestors had built as a last resort against the Devourers. In space above the planet, the effects were immediately visible. Energy began to flow between the ancient sites, creating a web of power that encompassed the entire world. The Devourer ships, which had been systematically draining power from every piece of galactic technology in range, suddenly found themselves facing something they could not consume. The energy network was not technological in the way the galaxy understood the term. It was biological, quantum, and spiritual all at once. It existed in a state that the Devourers could perceive but not affect, like trying to drain the color from light itself. Ha felt the change as soon as the network came online. The ancient knowledge that had been locked away in his genetic memory suddenly became clear and accessible. He understood now why the transformation had been necessary, why his people had to become something other than what they were. The Devourers were not simply destructive creatures. They were the ultimate predators, evolved specifically to hunt and consume the dominant forms of galactic civilization. They could adapt to any technology, overwhelm any defense, and turn any weapon against itself. The only way to fight them was to become something they had not evolved to counter. Something wild, something primal, something that operated on instinct and biology rather than logic and technology. The Changed Ones were living weapons, designed by an ancient civilization that had recognized the fundamental flaw in their own approach to warfare. The predecessors had tried to fight the Devourers with increasingly sophisticated technology, never realizing that complexity itself was what made them vulnerable. But the galaxy's current inhabitants would need time to understand this truth, and time was running out. Across known space, Devourer fleets were systematically dismantling the great civilizations that had taken to build. The Aquarian home world had already gone silent, its orbital cities drained of power and left to drift like empty shells. The military fortresses were reporting massive casualties as their most advanced weapons proved useless against the organic invaders. Ha opened a communication channel that reached every ship, every station, and every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. The power flowing through's ancient network made such feats possible, though he knew the effort would drain him completely. "People of the galaxy," he began, his transformed voice carrying across the void. "My name is Ha of the, you know us as the Howling Ones, the monsters you imprisoned out of fear. But we are not your enemies. We are your guardians, transformed by ancient science to fight a war that began before your civilizations existed. The response was immediate and predictable. Panic spread through the galactic communication networks as beings who had grown up on stories of the savage suddenly found one of them speaking directly to their homes and families. But Ha pressed on, knowing this might be his only chance to reach them. The creatures attacking your worlds are called devourers. They are not invaders from another galaxy. They are weapons, created by our mutual ancestors and lost to time until now. Your technology cannot defeat them because they were specifically designed to consume and corrupt technological civilization. On the bridge of the Concordia, Admiral watched in amazement as tactical displays throughout the galaxy began updating with new information. The communication network was somehow bypassing the Devourer jamming, allowing isolated ships and worlds to coordinate their defenses for the first time since the invasion began. However, Ha continued, there is hope. My people carry the genetic keys needed to activate ancient defensive systems hidden throughout the galaxy. We can teach you to fight back, but only if you are willing to trust us. The same fear that led you to imprison us may now be the key to saving you. The transmission cut out, leaving the galaxy to grapple with a revelation that challenged everything they thought they knew about their own history. Some worlds immediately began broadcasting requests for help, their leaders recognizing the truth in Ha's words as their conventional defenses crumbled before the Devourer assault. Others refused to believe, preferring to trust in their technology rather than accept aid from the creatures they had branded as monsters. These worlds would learn the hard way that pride and prejudice were luxuries they could no longer afford. But on Prime, the real work was just beginning. The ancient network was fully active now, its power flowing to dormant installations on worlds throughout the galaxy. Sites that had been dismissed as archaeological curiosities began to awaken, their true purpose finally revealed. Felt the network reaching out beyond their world, touching systems and installations that had waited eons for activation. On the core worlds of the galaxy, massive structures buried beneath cities and oceans began to stir to life. These were the real defenses left behind by the predecessors, weapons and shields that operated on principles the current galactic civilization had never imagined. But activating them would require changed ones to serve as living conduits, their transformed biology bridging the gap between ancient organic technology and the quantum forces that powered the network. And with Devourer fleets spreading across the galaxy like a plague, time was running out to get volunteers to the locations where they were needed most. The rescue mission would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever attempted, requiring cooperation between species that had been enemies for over 2 centuries. But as reports continued to pour in of worlds falling to the Devourer assault, even the most stubborn civilizations began to realize that their survival might depend on embracing the monsters they had tried so hard to forget. The first joint mission between the Galactic Fleet and the Changed Ones launched from Prime just 6 hours after the quarantine barriers fell. Admiral found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding a task force that included creatures his government had classified as too dangerous to exist in civilized space. The Concordia had been hastily retrofitted to accommodate passengers, though the modifications were unlike anything the ship's engineers had ever attempted. The Changed Ones required specialized environmental controls and reinforced bulkheads to contain their enhanced strength. More challenging still, they needed direct access to the ship's power systems to interface with the ancient network. Ha stood in the ship's primary cargo bay, which had been converted into a command center for the contingent. Around him, 24 of his people worked at stations that combined galactic technology with organic interfaces grown specifically for this mission. The sight was disturbing to most of the crew, who watched through the bay's windows as living conduits snaked between computer terminals and poolsing biological components. Admiral, Ha called through the ship's communication system, we're detecting massive Devourer activity around the home system. They've established what appears to be a breeding facility in orbit around the primary star. Felt his blood chill. A breeding facility meant the Devourers weren't just attacking randomly. They were establishing permanent settlements, turning conquered worlds into production centers for even more of their kind. How long before they spread to other systems? Based on the energy patterns we're detecting, perhaps days. The facility is already producing new vessels at an exponential rate. The tactical situation was worse than anyone had imagined. Intelligence reports indicated that similar facilities were being established throughout the galaxy, each one turning captured worlds into factories for the enemy. If the pattern continued, the Devourers would soon outnumber the Galactic fleet by orders of magnitude. "What do we need to do?" asked. Ha's Lupin features showed the strain of maintaining his connection to the ancient network. "There's a predecessor installation on Prime, buried beneath the planetary capital. If we can activate it, the facility will destroy the breeding center and create a safe zone where our ships can operate without being drained." It sounded simple enough, but knew better. Prime was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hundreds of Devourer ships. Getting close enough to deploy a team would require running a gauntlet that had already destroyed dozens of galactic vessels. "We'll need a distraction," he decided, "something big enough to draw their attention away from the planet." The solution came from an unexpected source. Commander approached the bridge with a tactical analysis that conventional military thinking. "Sir, I've been studying the Devourer attack patterns. They prioritize targets based on energy output and technological sophistication. Our most advanced ships draw their attention first, while simpler vessels are often ignored until the primary threats are eliminated." Began to understand. "You're suggesting we use our technological superiority against us?" "Exactly. If we deploy a fleet of advanced dreadnoughts as decoys, the Devourers will focus on them while a smaller, less sophisticated ship slips through to deploy the team." It was a desperate plan that would likely result in the loss of some of the galaxy's most powerful warships. But as reports continued to arrive of worlds falling to the Devourer assault, realized they had no choice. Within hours, a fleet of over 50 vessels had assembled at the edge of the system. The ships represented every major species in the galaxy, their crews united by desperation and the growing realization that their survival depended on trusting the very beings they had once feared. The diversionary attack began at dawn time. The Galactic fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons charging and shields at maximum power. The display was magnificent, a testament to centuries of technological advancement and military coordination. The Devourer response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of organic vessels swarmed toward the attacking fleet, their alien forms moving with predatory grace through the void. Energy weapons that had proven useless in previous engagements were fired anyway, creating a spectacular light show that served its intended purpose of drawing attention. While the main battle raged near the system's outer planets, a single modified transport ship approached Prime from the opposite direction. The vessel had been stripped of all advanced technology, its systems reduced to the most basic level possible. To Devourer sensors, it would appear to be nothing more than a refugee ship fleeing the battle. Inside the transport, led a team of 12 changed ones toward what might be their final mission. Each member had volunteered knowing the odds of survival were minimal, but they also understood that failure would doom not just their own people, but every living being in the galaxy. The approach to Prime was harrowing. Debris from previous battles littered the orbital space, and several times they had to navigate around Devourer ships that were focused on the main engagement. The planet below them showed the scars of conquest, its once beautiful cities dark and silent beneath a poisonous atmosphere. "Landing zone identified," the transport pilot announced. "Proximity to the target site is optimal, but we're reading massive Devourer activity in the area." Studied the tactical display, her enhanced senses picking up details that normal vision would have missed. The enemy had established a perimeter around the planetary capital, their organic sensors constantly sweeping for threats. Getting to the predecessor installation would require moving through hostile territory on foot. "Set us down at the coordinates we discussed," she ordered. "We'll proceed on foot from there." The transport touched down in what had once been a park in the city's residential district. The trees were withered and black, killed by the toxic atmosphere the Devourers had introduced to make the planet more suitable for their needs. The buildings showed signs of having been systematically stripped of all useful materials, their empty shells standing like tombstones marking a dead civilization. And her team moved through the ruins with inhuman speed and stealth. Their enhanced senses allowed them to detect Devourer patrols long before they could be spotted, while their altered biology made them nearly invisible to the enemy's organic sensors. The predecessor installation lay beneath the former government center, a massive complex that had once housed the planetary administration. The building's upper levels had been completely demolished by the Devourers, but the ancient technology hidden in its foundations remained intact. "Access point located," reported Thane, one of his pack mates. His transformation had enhanced his ability to perceive quantum fields, making him ideal for detecting the subtle energy signatures of predecessor technology. The entrance was hidden behind what appeared to be solid bedrock, but genetic codes caused the stone to flow like liquid, revealing a passage that descended deep into the planet's crust. The walls were covered with the same spiral symbols they had seen on Prime, glowing with increasing intensity as they approached the installation's heart. The chamber they finally entered was vast beyond imagination, its dimensions seeming to extend far beyond what the planet's geology should have allowed. At its center stood a structure that easy description, part machine and part living organism, its surfaces covered with conduits that pulsed with barely contained energy. "This is it," whispered, approaching the central console. "The core. If we can activate this, it will destroy every Devourer facility in the system and create a permanent safe zone." But as her team took their positions around the installation, new alarms began sounding throughout the complex. They were not alone in the ancient chamber. From the shadows emerged creatures that had once been, but were now something else entirely. The Devourers had not simply killed the planet's inhabitants. They had transformed the survivors into living extensions of their collective will. These hybrid beings retained enough of their original intelligence to operate complex systems, but their loyalty now belonged entirely to their new masters. "Intruders detected," one of the creatures announced in a voice that was simultaneously familiar and alien. "Biosignatures confirmed, initiating containment protocols." The battle for the core was about to begin, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The battle in the ancient chamber was unlike anything that had ever been fought in galactic history, and her team found themselves facing enemies that combined the tactical intelligence of with the adaptive capabilities of the Devourers. The transformed creatures moved with inhuman coordination, their attacks perfectly timed to exploit any weakness in the defenses. But the changed ones had advantages of their own. Their enhanced reflexes and primal instincts allowed them to respond to threats faster than conscious thought, while their connection to the ancient network gave them insights into the installation's defenses that their enemies lacked. Thane launched himself across the chamber with impossible speed, his claws finding purchase on surfaces that should have been too smooth to climb. He reached one of the hybrid creatures before it could complete its attack on the central console, his enhanced strength allowing him to tear through organic armor that had defeated conventional weapons. "The core is responding," shouted over the chaos of battle, her hands working frantically at the predecessor controls. The ancient technology was awakening after eons of slumber, its quantum processors beginning to interface with the network that spanned the galaxy. Around the chamber, other members of her pack fought desperately to buy her the time she needed. Each changed one was worth a dozen normal soldiers in close combat, but they were vastly outnumbered by the hybrid creatures that seemed to emerge from every shadow and corridor. Above them, in the space around Prime, Admiral watched as his diversionary fleet took devastating casualties. The Devourer ships had fallen upon the Galactic vessels with unprecedented fury, their organic weapons tearing through shields and armor that had been thought impregnable. Already, 3 dreadnoughts had been completely drained of power, their crews evacuated to other ships before the hulks were consumed by the enemy. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the planet," Lieutenant reported, her voice tight with concentration as she filtered the signal through the electromagnetic chaos of the battle. "Put it through." His voice crackled through the speakers, punctuated by the sounds of combat. "Admiral, we've reached the core, but we're under heavy attack. I need 5 more minutes to complete the activation sequence." 5 minutes might as well have been 5 hours. Could see that his fleet was being systematically destroyed, the Devourer ships adapting to every tactic and weapon his forces deployed. In 5 minutes, there might not be any galactic vessels left to protect. "All ships concentrate fire on the enemy breeding facility," he ordered. "We need to give the ground team more time." The remaining galactic vessels turned toward the massive organic structure that orbited Sun. The facility was easily the size of a small moon, its surface covered with production chambers that were constantly birthing new Devourer ships. Destroying it would set back the enemy's expansion plans significantly. But more importantly, it might draw enough attention to give team the time they needed. The concentrated assault on the breeding facility achieved its objective, but at a terrible cost. The Devourers responded by pulling ships from throughout the system to defend their strategic asset. The Galactic fleet found itself outnumbered 10-1, their formation breaking apart under the overwhelming enemy response. On the planet's surface, felt the ancient core reaching full power. The predecessor technology was operating on principles that transcended conventional physics, its quantum processors calculating probability matrices across multiple dimensions. Through her connection to the network, she could see the installation's true purpose. The core was not just a weapon. It was a key, designed to unlock the dormant potential hidden within every sapient species in the galaxy. The predecessors had seeded that potential eons ago, knowing that their descendants would need every advantage possible when the Devourers returned. But activating the core would require a sacrifice that had not anticipated. The system needed a living conduit, someone who could bridge the gap between biological and quantum consciousness. The process would mean permanent integration with the network, trading individual existence for the power to reshape reality itself. Around her, the battle was reaching its climax. Her pack mates were falling one by one, their enhanced abilities no match for the endless waves of hybrid creatures. Thane had been cornered near the chamber's entrance, his lupin form standing over the bodies of 3 enemies, while a dozen more closed in for the kill. He called out, his voice carrying both warning and farewell. "Whatever you're going to do it now." She made her choice in that instant, placing both hands on the core's central interface and opening her mind to the vast intelligence that flowed through the galactic network. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to contain an ocean within a teacup. Her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her physical form, touching every installation, every dormant system, every hidden piece of predecessor technology scattered across known space. Through the network, she felt the moment when the core achieved full activation. Energy cascaded outward from the planet in waves that transcended normal spacetime, reaching installations on worlds throughout the galaxy. Ancient defenses that had slumbered awakened in perfect synchronization, their combined power creating a field effect that the Devourers could neither comprehend nor counter. The enemy ships around Prime simply stopped functioning. Their organic technology, which had proved so effective against conventional weapons, found itself facing forces that operated on principles their creators had never imagined. The breeding facility, moments before invincible, began to collapse in on itself as the quantum fields that held it together destabilized. Admiral watched in amazement as similar effects played out across the galaxy. Reports flooded in from ships and worlds throughout known space, all describing the same phenomenon. Devourer fleets that had been systematically conquering entire systems were suddenly powerless, their vessels drifting helplessly as their organic technology failed. But the victory came with a price that became apparent only slowly. On worlds throughout the galaxy, members of every sapient species began to experience changes similar to those that had transformed the centuries earlier. The dormant genetic codes planted by the predecessors were awakening, triggered by the network activation. Some beings found their physical capabilities enhanced, gaining strength and speed that biological norms. Others developed new senses that allowed them to perceive quantum fields and energy patterns. A few discovered they could interface directly with technology, their minds bridging the gap between organic and artificial intelligence. The changes were not random or chaotic like the transformation had appeared to be. They were purposeful, designed to give each species the tools they needed to defend against future threats. The galaxy was evolving, guided by ancient wisdom toward a form that could survive in a universe where conventional technology was no longer sufficient. On Prime, Hafelt's consciousness joined the network permanently, her individual identity preserved, but expanded beyond anything a single biological form could contain. Through her, he could sense the vast web of intelligence that now spanned the galaxy, connecting every awakened mind in a collective that transcended species boundaries. The Devourers had not been destroyed, but they had been neutralized. Without their technological advantage, they were reduced to what they had always been at their core, predators dependent on the weakness of their prey. Against a galaxy of beings who could adapt and evolve at the quantum level, they posed no more threat than any other dangerous but limited life form. Years would pass before the full implications of the transformation became clear. The galactic civilization that emerged from the crisis bore little resemblance to what had come before. The rigid boundaries between species became fluid as beings discovered they could share consciousness and abilities through the network. Technology evolved from mechanical devices to living systems that grew and adapted based on need. And at the center of it all, the changed ones who had once been imprisoned as monsters found themselves serving as guides and teachers for species taking their first steps into a larger reality. The fear and prejudice that had led to their exile gradually gave way to understanding and respect for the sacrifice they had made to save a galaxy that had rejected them. The universe was vast and full of dangers that conventional wisdom could not address. But now the galaxy's inhabitants were no longer bound by conventional limitations. They had become something new, something that could adapt and survive in a cosmos where the only constant was change itself. The monsters had saved them all, and in doing so had shown that the greatest transformations often came through embracing what we feared most about ourselves.